I liked some of what I saw in Philadelphia. I liked a little of what I saw in Baltimore. I like none of this. I like, present tense, none of this. I expect to like none of what's ahead. Good morning to you. Good. Thursday morning, I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports, and this is Daily Shot of Steelers. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into hockey and or baseball, my daily shots of Penguins and Pirates will both return tomorrow. But the NFL didn't take Christmas off, so I didn't either, and I was at Acrisure Stadium covering Chiefs 29, Steelers 10, and it was out of these three consecutive losses that have really upended what earlier this month had been one of the more uplifting, surprising seasons anywhere in the league. This was the worst of them. It was the worst of them on the field, where very, very little went right. It was the worst of them off the field, where more defensive players, not just Patrick Queen, were suggesting that there are certain members on their side of the football who aren't trying as hard as they can. And even if they're correct, all that's going to do by making it public is have everyone swirling in all directions, both inside and outside the facility, as to who might they be talking about? Who is it? And there was Mike Tomlin after the game doing some things that were kind of in character, but still a little unsightly, blaming more than anything else for the loss, the failure to pounce on loose footballs that the Steelers had successfully pried free from the Chiefs, reiterating something that he's been suggesting throughout the season, that without takeaways, they don't really have a chance. And that's admitting more than you might think you're admitting. He also made the remark both before and then again after the game that Travis Kelce is a zone killer. He's someone who just eats zones alive, and yet Kelce was facing zones the whole game, including on a touchdown in which he walked around Cam Sutton, who was standing there flat-footed in a zone, never got picked up by anybody behind him, and eventually poor Patrick Queen is running down the field trying to compensate for this. But the head coach is admonishing everyone because Kelce's a zone killer? I asked Tomlin why the Steelers' offensive plays take so long to develop, which incidentally is statistically supported, and he acted as if he didn't understand what my question was. He's something about wanting it to be more specific. And how much more specific can you be than that? Your plays take too long to develop. Didn't even merit an answer, apparently. And on the field, I'm not even sure how much less can be said. You know, they were outscored 90-40 in these three games. That's the most lopsided trio of consecutive losses for the franchise since 1988. So they faced three good teams. They got spanked by three good teams. They got exposed. Really, I think beginning with the game in Cleveland. There's stuff that the Browns figured out from their defensive perspective that just changed the way this offense was operating. Specifically, Russell Wilson at that. He just hasn't been the same quarterback. But no one really on offense is getting it done. No one really on defense is getting it done. The special teams aren't even getting it done anymore. It's bad. And the scenario is bad. They're out of first place. They're out of control of first place, which means that if they don't finish in first place, of course, they're going to end up being a lower seed. They're going to go on the road somewhere, and they're going to face, whether it's Houston, Baltimore, there's a possibility that it's back to Orchard Park. And I think everybody knows how that'll go. At which point, this season isn't really any different than the seasons that came before it, at least not the past 7 or 8. And that's bad. And that would require, you would think, some significant change. And I don't mean change like in the off season or whatever. We have all of 2025 to talk about that. I'm talking about change between now and the regular season finale here against the Bengals. I'm talking about something that would take a really hard look at where this team is and prioritize putting the right people in the right places for the right reasons and doing it in the right here and now, even if somebody's ego has to take a bruising, all the way up to the head coach, and certainly to both coordinators. One thing that was interesting, and maybe even a little bit newsworthy out of the Tomlin press conference, was that he brought up on his own, in his little introduction that he does for us, that he's looking at change.
The bottom line is junior varsity is not good enough. We got to own that. But we also got to look at what it is we need to do different. We're not going to continue to do the same things and hope for a different result. That doesn't seem sharp to me, and so we're going to take a hard look at this. We got a couple extra days before we get back into it. We're going to take a look at it and make whatever necessary changes we need to make in the totality of this thing, because, again, that doesn't feel good. It doesn't look good, and that's just the truth and reality of it.
Okay, now what does that mean? Well, I don't know, although later on in that same session when he was asked about Jaylen Warren seeming to get favored over Najee Harris as the game went along, he kind of hinted in there and reminded everybody that he referred to change earlier in the session, so maybe there's some connection there. That would certainly seem to be both a welcome and very, very surprising event if it were to happen, but that's not going to do it. We've seen that. The Steelers ran for 200 yards yesterday and lost by 19. It's got to be meaningful. It's got to really be something. It was wonderful to see them finally throw a bunch to Pat Freiermuth. Not so wonderful, obviously, to see him fumble for the second time in 3 games, but he got involved in the offense. He showed what he can do in the offense. It was wonderful to see Mike Williams come up with a terrific catch, I thought, down the right sideline. It ended up getting nullified because of the weird rule that if you put the same foot in bounds twice, it doesn't count. The same as having 2 feet in. I'm going to imagine the NFL is going to take a look at that in the offseason. But the athleticism and everything else that he showed, this is a real live wide receiver. Use him. Use him. Everyone needs to stop being so stubborn and so fixed on whatever it was that they were doing back in training camp or OTAs or whatever. Use your best people. Stop trying to make stuff work just because you need it to work because you put a lot of time into it and you don't want to make yourself look like you gave up on your own idea. Just stop it. Just use plays that work. Use people that work. It's a little late in the process, I would say, to start thinking about quarterback. Definitely not too late to be thinking about what'll become of the position going into 2025, given what we've learned about, well, both of these guys, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, over the course of the season. But you're not going to do anything there now, obviously. Can you do anything with the offensive line? I don't know. At least talk about it. At least think about it. Don't slam the door on it. How many weeks are you going to watch Broderick Jones just flat out give out sacks? Because that's what he's doing, is giving out sacks left and right. Dan Moore was getting beaten yesterday. Isaac Seumalo had a bad day. You know, I keep going back to that time when Ryan McCollum came in for Zach Frazier. And no, that's not a move I'm going to suggest now. But I'm reminded that, somebody who can just come in off the bench sometimes can be better than who you're putting out there on a regular basis. Even if it's just for a game or two, they can surprise you in a pleasant way. Think about it. Talk about it. Act like change could be a real thing, not just for show. And defensively, look, the one thing that you'd want more than anything else is for everybody to get healthy again. There's a little bit of extra time between now and the game against Cincinnati, and Joey Porter Jr. could be back. Guys who are legitimately banged up, like TJ Watt, Dante Jackson, Cam Hayward, messed his ankle up a little bit yesterday, was able to come back in. You want them all to get healthy again. And you know what? You want to find out from your players, who is it that you're talking about? Because as frustrated as they sounded yesterday, they almost sounded, to be honest with you, as if they were begging for an audience with the head coach. As if to say, look, ask us who it is and we'll tell you. It's something that's got to be figured out. Nobody knows this stuff the way the players do, the way the guys who are on the field do. If it's someone in the secondary, and there were hints to that effect yesterday, okay, smoke them out. There's only one way to do that, and that's to take them out of the lineup, and we're all going to see it, and we're all going to report it, and okay, it'll be a story for a day or two and whatever. Get on with it. There's a NFL Films clip from a few years ago that you've probably seen it because it gets shown a lot, of Tomlin accosting Marquise Pouncey as he comes off the field, and he says to Marquise, after Marquise takes some selfish penalty, he says to him, "Is this bigger than you? Is this bigger than you? This thing that we're doing, is it bigger than you?" And Marquise kind of wants to just slink away and whatever, and Tomlin won't let him, gets right into his face and says, "Is this bigger than you?" And Marquise says, "Yes, it is." Well, I'll ask the reverse question here of Tomlin, and that is this bigger than you? Is this bigger than you admitting such and such was a mistake? You don't have to say it to reporters or whatever, but make the changes on the field. Make the necessary changes. Make the obvious changes. And from there, hope for one hell of a reversal. When we come back, J1Q. This segment of Daily Shot is brought to you by our good friends at Mike's Beer Bar. They're located on Federal Street, directly across from PNC Park. Mike has more than 500 beers on tap, including from more than 50 local breweries. Stop in and say hello. Tell Mike we sent you. Mike's Beer Bar. Today's J1Q comes from Tony, who asks, DK, are there some bad apples in the Steelers locker room? Maybe not distractions per se, but players who aren't devoting the time needed to execute properly. There seem to be hints of this from the veterans' comments over the past couple of games, especially on the defensive side. Tony, you're reading it correctly. You're reading it correctly in the sense that they're not the distraction types. They're not the AB types. They're guys who are, or a guy. That's the other thing that it doesn't end up being clear here, is whether it's an individual or whether it's multiple individuals. But whenever you hear these criticisms, you have to understand that the reference every single time is to not knowing assignments and not being fully prepared. And then from there, it gets into what Alex Highsmith brought up yesterday. And boy, was that striking coming from him. You're talking about a quiet guy, seemingly coming out of nowhere with a criticism like that, saying that guys lack want to. That's about desire. That's about character. That's rough, man. Whoever this is, I wouldn't want to be them whenever this does hit the fan. And in a way, it's a good thing that you have these players, these ones like Highsmith and Patrick Queen and Deshaun Elliott, who are visibly, audibly angry about this. You want that. That's the sign of a healthy room. The worst rooms, and I've covered a bunch of those, most of them in other sports, are the ones where this stuff just, it's acknowledged, it's seen, it's heard, but nothing's ever done about it. You want this. What's odd about it, to repeat from earlier, is going public with it. It's great for people like me because it gives us stuff to talk about. It's good content, but not necessarily great for the team. But I feel like there's another point to be made here on a parallel track, if you will. I'm not a buyer that as soon as this individual, gets replaced, and let's just say hypothetically that it's one of the nickel corners, and I'm not throwing you a hint. I actually don't know who it is. If I did, I'm not exactly in the secret keeping business. I would share. But let's say it's one of the nickel corners, and then the other nickel corner ends up getting the starting job in whichever direction. Again, I probably shouldn't even have said a position because now you think that I know who it is, and I don't. Whoever it is that you put into that position next isn't going to change the fortunes of the football team, all right? It's not even going to change the fortunes of the defense. I'm sure it'll help, and I'm sure everyone who's involved in that defense will appreciate having it addressed and will appreciate the support from above. and will feel that much more determined to show Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and the Bengals that, see, this is how we can play when we have that problem guy or guys off the field. But I don't think there's a thing here, okay? I don't think there's a football thing here, as much as there is a narrative that's made its way to the surface. There are a lot of things wrong with this team right now. There are a lot of things wrong schematic-wise, personnel-wise, usage-wise, execution-wise, that the effort of an individual or two, abhorrent as it might be, honestly can't really climb too high on the list. Not that it won't be interesting along the way to see how, in fact, it plays out. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody who listens to Daily Shot of Steelers. Hope everyone had an otherwise terrific Christmas. And again, all 3 of the Daily Shots will be back for their regular Friday episodes.